that are going to be happening.
Mm-hmm.
Bit of time with family maybe, and we were having a think about what could we talk about. So we thought we would talk about time, but we better be a little bit clearer about what we mean, I suppose. So we've and also just to say, my name's Lee Norris, and I'm a coaching consultant with Change Innovators, and I'm based in Bristol in the UK. And with me is
Dawna Atamanchuk, and I'm from Winnipeg in Canada.
So there's thousands of miles between us, but we're always close.
Yes.
That's how it feels. And we work for changeinnovators.com. And we're a coaching and leadership development company. So here we go. First question. Where do we develop our understanding of time, and how does it shape the way we experience it? So what do you think about that, Dawna? What comes up for you when you think about that?
Yeah, where do we get our understanding of time? Why is it that sometimes we move fast? Why do we move slower? I think for myself, we talk about the idea of it comes from our personal experiences of what we've either what's in our pot of soup, what we've grown up with as kids, as children, as we move into the workplace, or what becomes expected of us, what we become rewarded for. What seems to maybe allow us to potentially get what we want or what we don't want. So understanding how that all works together.
Mm.
And so I always like to tell people, how does it shape the way we experience it? I always like to tell people that I know I walk fast, but it doesn't mean I'm always in a rush to get somewhere. It's just that I walk fast to get there. So if you see me walking fast, don't assume I have somewhere to be. It's just the way I like to move. So making those understanding time, yeah. I always wonder why it is like my son would walk to school and he would hear the first bell and then he would leave. And I'm like, you're going to be late for school. You're going to be late for school. It's like, no, I'm not. I've got lots of time. But he could walk to school. I had to go and take a bus and wait for the bus. And so our concepts of even showing up for something is very, very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're making me think as well, like in some of my coaching conversations these days, people sometimes refer to their time as being time wealthy maybe, or time poorer, so and that's interesting. It really has made me think when I'm with people, is that they're sometimes commenting on their ability to reflect properly because they're so busy. So when we're working on leadership development programs, and coaching is part of that, sometimes I think I get a sense from my clients that the development process through the program is taking a bit of time, and then the coaching is taking a bit of time, and they're considering how much time they should, and that's a kind of loaded should to generate a bit of a topic for us, give to their own development, versus maybe the perception of getting on with their job. How much time in a leadership position is it okay to dedicate to yourself?
Well, with that theory and idea that comes to mind, about wealth or poor, is like, do you start your day with that space? And not every day is the same, right? Because, but do we start our day from understanding of time from a space of abundance, or do we start it from not enough? And the ability for us to think about how we actually understand that concept,
Yeah.
And where that comes from, right? If you continue to say there's never enough time, we can't get that done. If you work in a workspace and you walk in with an idea and the first thing someone says is, well, who has time for that? Those things are ticking, tick, 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 tick. And as we like to say, they can be creating different pathways. So maybe your concept with time with one person could be different than your concept of time with another person. Like it's not that you have to be one or the other of abundance or lack of.
No.
wealthy or poor.
Yeah. I suppose there's a mindset around it, whether or not you feel, because feeling comes into this. My own personal view is that how people feel has a big impact, or what they believe maybe about their time. But as a mindset, am I starting off from a deficit place, that there isn't enough time, I'm overwhelmed,
right?
And particularly this time of year, when it's possible that people feel under more pressure because they know they're going to have a bit of time off over Christmas. I know not everybody has time off over the Christmas period, but the idea that we're coming to the end of the year and we've got to get everything done. Oh, and by the way, on top of that, I've got to get presents, and then on top of that, I've got to get family's coming around, and if I bought the turkey, all this. I can see it's a period of time which could generate quite a lot of noise in people's heads. Their roommate, as we sometimes talk about it, in their head is going, really kind of loud, and, reminding people that time is scarce. And as opposed to, another, and I know it's not that binary, and I'm mindful of that when you're saying that, is that, there's a kind of being in the moment sort of time and enjoying what's happening, rather than being concerned about all the things you haven't done. Being in the here and now, where you can look forward and be happy, or you can be stressed. I mean, you kind of can have some choices, maybe.
Yeah. So, and I think can we move to one of the other questions? Can I switch it up? So I think it kind of leads nicely to this idea here about, that space of when we choose to sit down. So you and I choose to sit down together today. And that ability for us to understand that the way we show up with our time, what we choose to talk about, how that can even shape how we use our time. So we might have made time for somebody, but we actually spend that time talking about something over here that is totally out of our control. And so even though you and I have chosen to connect, we've decided to go for a work lunch or a work coffee or something, right? A celebration of some sort over this next month. That ability for us to realize, like, how am I choosing to use that time? So yes, I technically have made the time in my calendar, but it doesn't actually mean I still bring that abundance of time with me, or that concept of wealth of time, or the wealth and appreciation of our conversation or our activity together, right?
And the ability to be in the moment is important when you're coaching, right? It's important when we're preparing for this, because we've kind of got into the swing of it a little bit now. And I know it's all very well planned, right? Yeah, that's what we're going to let people know. But we kind of think about some questions, and then we just turn up and let it flow. But to be really present, and to, acknowledge that both of us are busy, and, we have busy lives and families and so forth. But we've made a choice to be here, to have some time to do this reflection. And it's a good, for me, it feels good. It feels like a really good, positive thing to do.
And then that space of how do we actually shape and influence how we use our time? It's that emotional component. We talk about the importance of our emotions that we choose to bring into something. So, on Saturday evening, going to a celebration, my husband was getting home from work, and based on the roads, it was unpredictable. And so how do we actually shape and influence how we use our time? How I chose to use my time and the emotions I brought to that time really made a difference in that evening. Because I could have sat around and said, I'm just waiting for him to get home for this. But I didn't choose to do that. I chose to do something else that I could enjoy. I could be ready to go when he got home.
Yeah.
And we could then lead and go out together to something we both enjoy. So how we actually shape and influence how we use our time is also the emotions that we bring to it. Maybe when it's even the assumption of it's on or off track. It didn't really matter, right? When we got there, we got there, and that would be the right time. And so this whole concept of time, and when we do something, when we respond to something, is we put a lot of shoulds, that we should do this, or I should be responding to my emails at this time, or I should be working at this time. When if you're in a world where you have to do creative work, maybe 8 to 4, or the scheduled time doesn't work, but you have a creative moment. And we sometimes fight that a creative moment because of our influence of how we've developed our understanding of time, of when we should or shouldn't be working.
So can we just for a second, can we go back to the original question? Would that be okay?
Of course it is.
So let's have a think about that then. So where do we learn? Where do we develop our understanding of time? And how does it shape the way we experience it? So I think your example of school is a good one. So, you know, I used to walk to school sometimes, which was quite a long way away. It used to take me an hour. Sometimes I used to get driven sometimes, and I had to be there and prepare for somebody else's parent maybe picking me up. I remember, you know, the timetable, and I remember, you know, every lesson was an hour or 45 minutes or 50 minutes long, and then you were on to the next thing. So you're like on a conveyor belt of learning. You know, those things are, now that I stop and think about it, those things really probably are quite important, because they lead to a form, you know, they're kind of like what you do before you start working, aren't they? Go to school.
Yes. And for some people, they thrive in it and they continue with it. And then there's others that that don't. You know, they talk about professional athletes really having, like when it's the season, just really, do they have a lot of influence or not on their time, you know? Or do they go back to being in school where there's a very strict timetable of when they need to be here, and then the impact that that has on them as well. So yeah. I think it's more the response. I mean, I think it's that expectation that you must do it. Or if you learned, like, yes, I know that that's going on, but if you, you know, like having some feeling if you could influence your time at all.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because again, I'm saying it's funny. It's because I've got a thought going on in my head, which I'm finding amusing. Sorry. So I'm just catching my words. That we talk about detachment from the outcome of things.
Yeah.
And I think that is important, because it can be a real stressor when you're attached to something, especially if you don't have, and rarely do you don't have control. You know, it's trying to get on top of work is one example of that. Trying to get on top of homework, you know, and when you're younger, you know, if you really attach yourself to the outcome of things, it can be really stressful. Whereas if you don't do that, if you detach yourself, and that's not an easy thing to do, especially if you've got an exam or something and you want to, you know, something's riding on the back of you passing an exam or passing a test, and you know that the potential is that that's going to shape the rest of your life, that can be really, really debilitating. Whereas if you can put yourself into a mode where you're kind of like, you know, it's important, but you're just going to really focus on it and, you know, just enjoy it for what it is, and you don't worry about the outcome, time can really fly, because you get into a stage of flow.
Right. So you know, when they start looking at how it is that as adults start to have many responsibilities or different things going on, how they even, their understanding of time is instead of having an attachment to, they must do these certain things when it comes to like fitness, they talk about really understanding kind of the concept that they have 25 minutes. So what can you do at that time? So detaching from this expectation of what should be, and sort of just going and being in that 25 minutes and finding a way to be in the flow. But one of the things as we start to develop our understanding of time is that how much time do you really need? You know, like once you start to become more focused and you get in the flow, you're more mindful, what you can actually get done in a certain amount of time can actually change. Yeah. And if you are, I always say the month of December is, I'm actually prepping for it all year, you know, like being able to have good sleeping patterns, to be able to have good relationships, to have set boundaries earlier on in the year really helps me develop my understanding of time and how I'm going to spend it. And where I'm going to give more energy at certain times, and then where I'm going to try and hold on to some of my energy at other times.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, it feels like we've moved on to the third question.
Oh. without any plans, hey?
So, yeah. And I think what you're saying is really relevant to this question. How can we focus our time? I love the idea of putting of what you're putting your energy into, being because that's what we are, isn't it? We're kind of beings that put our focus and then our energy into different things. And when we are feeling under pressure, or we don't feel we've got enough time, that's when we can get burned out, and it becomes more stressful when we take on a lot, and then we kind of, what do we worry about? We worry about judgment, we worry about failing. So is there some sort of link in modern society, in as far as I know it, between time and success and failure, as opposed to time and being happy, focusing on things that make me happy, as opposed to things that I feel like I have to do?
Well, I'm sure there's lots of research on that. I mean, you go into a room of people, and the people who will likely have the proportions of time, their time in proportions of where they'd like to be spending it. They likely have more choice and influence over it. Because someone, like lots of adults, go back to school, they'll take either traditional academic, or they're taking different types of learnings with podcasts or online courses or auditing a program. And, if someone finds that something that brings them joy, then that would be on that positive side, right? Of joy. I am learning, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
I think our perception of what goes into those boxes is our own energy that we bring into the way we judge, as you mentioned, judge or look at something of someone else's time. So if we're in the weeds all the time, that's usually not a lot of fun. That's pretty standard, but we may need to get into the weeds for a little bit over the next little while, but to understand that you've chosen to spend your time there, which I think is this really interesting concept of how we cultivate positive energies. I'm choosing to go in and do something. I'm thinking intentionally about how I'm going to use my time and what I want to do. I really do think that the choices we make today, it's like water, right? We drink water today for tomorrow. We don't drink it because we're thirsty right at this exact moment. We do things. So how are we looking at our choices, our time, the decisions we make longer term when it comes to this concept of shaping our experiences with time?
And in that, is it that how often do people consider what's best for me? And I don't mean that in a just a purely selfish, well, maybe I do mean it in a really selfish way. So we're coming into a period now where, people are going to be, some people at least, are going to be really busy. And they're going to feel like they've got this kind of break or holiday, or maybe they're going to be either that, or maybe they're going to be working really hard because the Christmas period and the festive season in the UK and in Canada and all over the world probably these days, it's really intense. Sometimes some companies are going to make a majority of their profit for the year in the next few weeks. And yet we're also trying to, to get a balance between, that kind of doing and being happy. For me, it does keep coming back to that. It's not necessarily just what I'm doing. Is what I'm doing making me feel fulfilled? Is it making me feel happy? Is it taking me towards a place that that I want to be? I just wonder how often people really have the time to reflect on that.
I don't know how often people think about it. I think people may feel they're more in that responsive, reactive space.
Yeah.
I do believe that when you do sit down with someone and they potentially are sharing things that bring them joy, they're intentionally either choosing to do them, but they're also intentionally choosing to how they look at them. It is that space of, it is exhausting right now. And your comment is there's many companies that this is their bread and butter. It's their time. And if you're working in a place like that, like, what is the language? What is the words? What is the energy? What's the culture around it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. And that goes right back to the second question. I'm just going to bring it back up.
For
Is
sure.
How do we believe we can actively shape and influence how we use our time? Well, the language that we use around it is definitely going to have an impact on that. Definitely, because in our expression of how we feel, our expression of what we do creates a kind of reality for us. I'm busy. That if you say to somebody else, I'm busy, and you say it like that, you're also creating a reality for them, which is that you're busy.
Yes, and you may or may not be, right, from a perspective of what someone else would be looking at.
Yes.
And so do we believe we can actually shape and influence how we use our time? If we feel like we have the ability to influence, then we can.
Yeah.
Because we influence our time, which is, yes, it's on the clock, but we also influence the concept of time based on just how we choose to jump into it.
Yeah.
And if you are, I know the comment seems, but like if you are sort of getting the things that we need, right? Like when you do have the ability to connect with people, if you do have the capacity to be eating like real food and getting sleep and getting movement, right? And like just natural movement of our body, and we're having the ability to connect with other people, that use of time will potentially feel very different. 3 hours with someone you absolutely enjoy their time versus 20 minutes with somebody that's draining you one can perceive to be so much more than the other, when in reality, the 20 minutes is still giving you so much more time.
Yeah. And in that moment when you're kind of enjoying yourself, time can really fly.
And you mentioned that about work projects and things, that ability for us to be able to, when you talk about the language we use around it, it's also understanding the choices we make when we're busy and we don't stop and take like a meal break, right? We can perceive to be so much more than the other, when in reality, the 20 minutes is still giving you so much more time.
Yeah. And in that moment when you're kind of enjoying yourself, time can really fly.
And you mentioned that about work projects and things, that ability for us to be able to, when you talk about the language we use around it, it's also understanding the choices we make when we're busy and we don't stop and take like a meal break, right? We think we're superheroes, but in reality, those are not superhero activities. A superhero is someone that says, you know what, I need 20 minutes to go sit down.
Yeah.
I need my food. I know myself well enough, that concept you've talked about, self-reflection. I know myself well enough that I actually can't miss my meal. I can't be here in 6 hours if I miss this, or I need 5 or 10 minutes of fresh air. I need a change of activity. Those types of things make a big, big difference when we can feel like we have an influence and choice over our time as well.
Yeah. And going back to the first question, which was, where do we develop our understanding of time? Do you think that we can update that, and continue to redevelop our understanding of time through activities like coaching, through life experiences like parenthood and work and everything else, that we don't have to be stuck? Yeah,
I definitely do. I think the concept of time, from a horizon perspective, how far out you actually are comfortable looking. For some people, maybe that's not something that was in their pot of soup or they grew up with, that things were short, very short term. But that ability to sort of think long term about choices and behaviors. Yeah. And I do think at work as well, I think if you're given the space where I have some creative work I need to do. So for me, I've decided that Sundays for a few hours is a really good time where I don't have those. I can just take a break, and I've gotten buy-in from my family that, so I can step aside and I have this time. I'm creating this time. So yeah.
Yes, and what I hear you saying, although I could be wrong, is that you're creating space for things that give you energy, or doing things that maybe you have to get them done, but there's an when we're being creative, it can actually be really a really happy place. But you can't.
And I also know myself well enough that that's not stuff I find easy to do when there are these just other things that I know that if someone sends me something, that my personality is I want to get back to them. So understanding my own challenges of my personality, right?
Yeah.
How do I create time and schedule? That's why I love getting up in the morning and going for a walk, and that ability to really have, I don't like routine, but I do like some routine around my concepts of when's the best time for me to be in the flow.
Yeah.
That's what I like. I like routine that allows me to be in the flow.
Yeah. And this self-knowledge that you're talking about, I mean, I know now lots more about this through, some of the work, well, a lot of the work that we do, and we use psychometrics, for example. We look at disc profiles, we look at driving forces, and we look at emotional intelligence, those things, which I know it's easy to say, it is, because I was a person that years ago might have said, oh yeah, I don't need to do all of that. I know myself well enough. Actually, but I didn't.
Right. Yeah, no, those profiles really open the door, right? They show you things.
Yeah. And it can be, I can reflect on that and think, well, maybe I was just a bit closed at the time, maybe I just wasn't ready to do that. And now that, I've spent some time, and now I teach it, like as do you, but we spend time helping people to kind of know themselves in much greater depth. This idea of, more about yourself, how you like to work, therefore you can plan your time and be more intentional about it, has come from putting effort and time and effort into understanding who you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. And understanding for me that when I sit down with somebody and they don't see time the same way as I do, and they start having a conversation, the ability for us to function together, work together, be friends together, be in the community together, isn't for me to challenge their concept of time. It's actually just to let them have their concept of time, and to say that works for them, but it doesn't have to be like that for me. And that has made a real difference in me trying to defend the way I see time and my short-term thinking on some things and long-term thinking on other things. Yeah. And so that an agile mind and also a fixed mindset when it comes to time.
Yeah. It's important to recognize that there are such things as those sort of concepts of being fixed and open. And you're reminding me of a piece of work or a lecture that John Cleese gave about his creative process. Okay. And he talks about open time and closed time. And in the open time, it's playful. It's about not setting boundaries. It's about not worrying. And he talks about two types of time: making the time and then using the time. There's no point making time to do something and then not using it to do what you set out to do.
Yes.
Amongst other things. So if you decide you're going to be playful and creative, then be playful and creative. And then when you've finished, then get into a more closed way of working and go and do something. Yeah. So the two exist side by side.
Wow.
Well, there we go.
Excellent. Well, we want to thank you very much for joining us today, Lee, Norris, and myself, Dawna Atamanchuk. Really appreciate that you're here. We wish you all the best over the next 30 days with enjoying the space you're in. And the space is different for everybody. So, you know, if you're going for a walk and seeing some beautiful lights, or driving by on the bus and seeing some beautiful lights, just take a moment to stop and reflect and enjoy them, because that's a concept of time that was meant for you to enjoy. If you're interested in those types of things, we can't always may not feel like we have a lot of time in the next 30 days, but the time is there, and it's what we choose to sort of see in that peripheral that could make a difference in how we start 2025. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you again in the new year.
Bye, everyone.